Hi folk, Michael here. Look, I've got to be honest, it still hurts when I think about these mistakes, but a wise person learns from other people's mistakes. And if you're thinking of getting into real estate, or you already are a real estate investor, then hear me out and you'll hopefully avoid these pitfalls. First, I'm going to give you the context and what happened. Then I'll explain how I got out of each hole, how you can too, but more importantly, how you may be able to avoid making these same mistakes as I did. Now, you may be able to make 5 or 6 or even more figures if you can avoid these problems. If you find these tips helpful and you want to be sure that you never miss any more like these ones in the future, then please be sure to subscribe to my channel, where I discuss investing and personal finance topics. So thank you so much, guys. It really helps the algorithm in promoting this content, and I really do appreciate it. So first, if you ever hear that a property that you're interested in has legal issues concerning, for instance, the recognized nature of the building. So for example, you've got a single family home, it's being used as a multifamily home, which means it's being used as a duplex, so 2 families, or triplex, or 3 families, or quadplex, so 4 families. But maybe it was never zoned that way as a multifamily. It was maybe zoned as a single family. You may want to run away from it like the plague. To take you back to this one property that caused most of these headaches. So I purchased a single family home in 2022 that was rented for decades, in fact, pretty much for a century, as a multi-family duplex, so 2 separate units within the building. Now, when I went under contract, so when I was given the offer was accepted and it was going through negotiation, going through the checks, making sure that the mortgage was going to run through, making sure that I did my due diligence in terms of inspecting the property, etc. I was kind of led to believe in a certain sense that, all I needed to do was get a 2-page form, bring it up to code. That was all I had to do, just a 2-page form, and that was good. Well, let me tell you, 3 months later, a lawyer, several researchers, an architectural drawing, and a local hearing, almost like a court case, I was then finally successfully granted the permission to rent it as a duplex, as it always had been. But I wanted to make sure it was done legally, so that if I exited the property, or if I was trying to get another loan based on the property, I could qualify not just one future tenant, but multiple future tenants, legally speaking. Now, I also had letters of support from the neighbors, as well as proof that it was up to the duplex standard in terms of, separate entrances, there was 2 garage, separate utilities, etc., etc. And this was with the property being rented out since before the code even existed. So we're talking 100 years. So, forget simple appeals to grandfathering in. Murphy's Law applied. If it can go wrong, it will. So look, if you're willing to take on the burden, great. But it will still be held over your head as something that could be revoked later. So honestly, I personally will avoid taking on any properties with legal issues ever again. So my second mistake is just one common to real estate investors far and wide. If you're already in real estate, you probably know what I'm talking about, which is just being too optimistic. It's good to be optimistic, right? But be realistic. My first few real estate projects had gone so successfully that I was veering away from realism towards optimism. I like to buy cosmetic fixer-uppers. So that means that, it's probably your granny's or your great-grandfather's house. You got the avocado bathroom. You have maybe a terrible wallpaper, something from the 60s or 70s that really needs to be redone. The carpet maybe stinks a little bit, but there's nothing, the roof is fine, the electric is fine, the plumbing is fine. I like to get those properties where it's just a cosmetic fixer. It's not going to be tearing down the property and rebuilding it. It's just more going to be paint, carpeting, countertops, new appliances. And I deem these typically to be undervalued because usually when you go into these properties, your standard millennial or Gen Z that's looking at the property to buy it, they want everything being perfect. Your typical mom and pop, they want to walk in day one that it's ready. So typically they undervalue. So in other words, it usually on average will cost about 3 times more to actually buy a perfect home in terms of cosmetics than it would cost. If something cost you maybe $10,000 to fix, well, it actually will probably sell for about $30,000. So you might actually buy it for $30,000 under the price of if it had been perfected before you bought it, and you put $10,000 in, so that's a gap of $20,000. So usually there's a little bit of undervaluing because people, when they move in, they don't want the headache of having to do things themselves. So you renovate them, I then rent them out, and I reappraise them with the mortgage company, for instance, to increase my net worth, the value that I have. So if I purchased a house for $500,000 and I put $100,000 of work into it, it might actually be now valued at $800,000. So my net value has gone up by $200,000. So the line between cosmetic, which is just your paint, your flooring, and structural, where you're fixing the fundamentals like the roof, the plumbing, the electric, it's quite fine. And unfortunately, I crossed it in this same duplex. Now, luckily, the value was in the buy, and it was good enough, but my profit was more or less wiped away. So watch out for structural renovations. Budget for them if you must. If you must do one, by all means, but make sure you budget. I simply just didn't realize that my cosmetic would turn into a structural renovation. Almost everything had to be replaced except the location. And it's all in the buy. So thankfully, I did my work well here to give me just enough breathing room, just enough of a buffer. Due to the legal issues, I felt cajoled into hiring a general contractor. So someone that's a jack of all trades, has a license, and then they basically subcontract small people. So the general contractor might deal with the headaches of, let's say, the legal going back and forth to the local planning authorities, but then they hire all the separate subcontractors that might do the bathrooms, the kitchens, the painting, the flooring, etc. So rather than you hiring someone that will do the tiling, someone that will do the painting, they will hire everyone underneath. Now, I discovered pretty soon that I could have just gotten a drafts person, someone to write the drafts for the local planning authorities, and hired my own separate teams that I had used in the previous renovations, but I felt pressured to hire a general contractor. Now, hiring a general contractor will also raise your costs, typically by about 25%, and you end up with a black box without full control. It's like an automatic car where you don't really feel like you're the same ability to control things. So you don't have the full control of the quality of all the separate subcontractors. And usually they might be trying to make a profit, so they might be cutting in terms of quality of the subcontractors. Speed as well, because you're really at the mercy of the GC, of how fast they go. And essentially the GC is largely controlled. So the solution for this one is basically just to have different tasks for different contractors. Separate the tasks for different contractors. That's the take home. Yes, it can be easy. You can save your headache with the GC, but you will also pay a lot more and you won't have the same control over what you get done underneath that. Related to the above point, which really had to do with incentives, you want to separate the teams that conduct regular maintenance. If you have a rental property and you send over maintenance workers to do certain jobs for you, certain tasks, you want to separate those from the workers that you employ that will basically do renovations before you start to rent a place out. So the two different teams should be separate because otherwise your incentives are misaligned. So what that means is if you hire someone to do the renovations and they're the same people that will be called over to fix things if things break, it just leads to bad incentives. Now, I'm not saying that they're basically making sure that they're building in self-obsolescence so that the thing is going to fall apart so they get called back to fix it. But you are creating the wrong incentives when your regular maintenance staff that do, for instance, the regular checkups and repair, if they do the actual renovations for you, you're just mixing, things that you don't want to have in the same pool. So incentives are misaligned. It's good to separate one team that does your renovations when you're renovating a property and another team that does your regular maintenance. So this was one where I definitely have made mistakes in the past. That's a big one. So you don't want built-in obsolescence. So my intention was to essentially house hack, which just means that you live in the property in one unit and you rent out either a bedroom, part of your home, or if you've got a multifamily, which means at least 2 units in the same building. It's what like a duplex or a triplex, which is 3, or a quadplex, which is 4, etc. You rent out the other ones. It's almost like sharing with your roommates, only now you're in almost separate apartments. So I plan on doing this house hacking so that I would pay for my mortgage and my tenants would help to subsidize my mortgage. I was going to live in one unit and rent out the other unit long term because the relative ease of long-term tenants and just the extremely good deal that I thought I had gotten when I purchased the property. So instead of $100,000 and 3 months, my ultimate cost and time was closer to $500,000 or $500,000 and 18 months. Whew. So to recoup my losses, I decided to switch plans and convert this property into a short-term rental and leave it, since the cost of me renting elsewhere was much cheaper than the foregone rent. Now, even if there are no laws against short-term renting, many areas are now effectively clamping down on short-term renting. All it takes is a few folk to be discontent and you'll not be allowed to use it as a short-term rental, no matter how willing you are to work with the local authorities. It's a case of NIMBY, or not in my backyard. Others can be renting short-term legally, but you just get in on the wrong side of folk once and that's it. So the solution, as much as I tried my best to avoid getting on the wrong side of folks, the painfully long renovations, which should have been only 3 months and no stress, turning out to be 18 months almost and a huge amount of stress, that really led to creating issues with folks. So getting on the right side of folks and researching your deals so that they make sense, even if you have to long-term rent it. Thankfully, I went into it planning on long-term renting it, so the numbers made sense. All that happened was that the time for me to break even just lengthened by a few years because of the massive costs that I incurred renovating the property above and beyond those which I thought, and the actual fact that I couldn't rent it out for over a year after I purchased the property. So the underlying asset that I have is stable. It's in an A-class or a top quality neighborhood, and I bought the property for about $506. And the property reappraised close to 800. At this point, you could probably get almost 900,000, or even if you got unlucky, the right buyer, you could almost get $1 million. So with that plus the rental revenue that I've made over the last 2 years or so, that has just about covered the cost of renovating, plus the ongoing cost. So the solution always is to buy right. Buy an asset that is hopefully undervalue enough that it makes sense long term. So another really important mistake is forgetting to subscribe. So if you click just below the video, it takes just a second, it's absolutely free, and hopefully you'll save more money and you'll avoid other issues in the future. It really does help, and I really do appreciate it, guys. And I know I said 5 mistakes, guys, but just an extra 6th for watching this far. Demolition, or demo, is cheap. Open everything when you're doing it. So I opened the ceilings between the 2 units, but I did not open the walls, thinking I would save money. Would have saved a lot more in the time because of how long it took and how much more expensive it was to have contractors there working on plumbing, on electrical, etc., with closed walls, and all the work it took to fix and repair those walls in terms of new sheetrock, new painting, etc. So the subsequent damage and repairs to the existing walls, just not worth it. So when you're demoing, it's just much cheaper, much faster. You can lay cables in no time. It's much cheaper for your electrical, much cheaper for your plumbing if you're doing more of a structural renovation. So there you have it, guys. 5 biggest mistakes in real estate investing, plus an extra bonus one. And if you like this video, please subscribe so you never miss another Investing Professor video. Appreciate it so much, guys.